The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. We are very excited to welcome you all to day 2 of the California Transportation Commission meeting. Today is October 14th, and we are excited to have you all participate in this important meeting, day 2. Douglas, could you please read the instructions for the public to participate in today's meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome to the day 2 of the October 2021 CTC virtual meeting. Links for our meetings can be found on the first page of our agenda, which is on our website. Please use the questions tab in the webinar if you have questions about their meetings or operations of the CTC. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our meetings normally take place in diverse locations around the state so that commissioners can see firsthand the variety of infrastructure issues around California. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to this webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. The Commission's meeting agenda is located on our website, www.catc.ca.gov, and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar. Live closed captioning, Spanish language, and American Sign Language translations are being provided for this meeting. You can access these services by utilizing the webcams feature on the webinar and through links found on our meetings page under the October 13th, 14th meeting headline. Commissioners, should you have any questions or comments during the meeting, please let us know by raising your hand, texting us, or otherwise getting our attention on camera, and wait for the chair to call on you. You can also send inquiries and comments through the questions tab that can be read to presenters and the audience on your behalf. Madam Chair, I know we have a couple of commissioners who are on by phone who will do their best to get your attention should they have questions or comments.
Thank you very much.
Please mute your microphone except when you intend to speak to minimize outside noise and feedback. The chair will do her best to call on each of you in turn. We hope that you will turn on your camera while speaking if you have one. Because this meeting is not an in-person meeting, every vote will need to be a roll call vote. Staff will group items for votes to help save time. Please only speak when called upon. When you are called upon, please state your name briefly and briefly make your point. I would please ask that no one speak a second time on any one item until everyone who wishes to speak a first time has done so. Presenters, if you're on the agenda to make a presentation, please do your best to be succinct. We hope that you will also turn on your camera during your presentation if you have one. Members of the public, we welcome comments made from the public as part of each item at this meeting. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as early into the item as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. You should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find an audio and questions tab. Under the audio tab, attendees will have the choice to listen via the computer or telephone option. Should you prefer computer audio, please ensure the appropriate box is selected. If you choose the phone call option, please select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio pin as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio pin is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak to the Commission should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants as they are registered to specific attendees and can create confusion for staff when making comments. There are two options for participants to provide comments on the agenda items. Click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment at the appropriate time. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Alternately, you may use the questions tab, type in the agenda item number you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. In both cases, please do your best to be concise with your comments. Please also make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Since we often have many speakers, we ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on a topic, we reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute each as needed. A timer may be displayed on the screen during public comments. You will not be able to be on camera while making your comments. Thank you for joining us today. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing some of it with us.
Thank you so much, Douglas. And could you please read the roll for day 2?
Commissioner Alvarado,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Eager,
Here.
Commissioner Falcone,
Here.
Commissioner Grisby,
Present.
Commissioner Guardino,
Present.
Commissioner Inman,
Here.
Commissioner Liu,
Here.
Commissioner Martinez,
Present.
Commissioner Tavoloni, Commissioner Tavoloni, Chair Norton,
Present.
Senator Newman, Assemblymember Friedman. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today doing our work. You will notice that many of us have our Dodgers and Giants jerseys on, and we enjoy our rivalry. This is a statewide commission, and it is good that California will win no matter what tonight. So with that, we would like to start with item 57. I do want to point out that for those who are tuning in who might have wanted to participate in item 115, that was voted on yesterday due to my conflict. So we will be moving through item 57 through the balance of the agenda except item 15 today. So that's 57 through 118. Gurtej, could you present the right-of-way matter today?
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton, and good morning, Commissioners. Tab 57 is a resolution of necessity for a $13.2 million project on State Route 12 in Sonoma County. The project is a bridge replacement that is scour critical. Prior to initiating eminent domain proceedings to acquire needed right-of-way for this programmed bridge replacement project, the Commission must first adopt this resolution. As part of the adoption of this resolution, the Commission is affirming that Caltrans has met specific findings identified under Code of Civil Procedure Section 1245.230 and Government Code Section 7267.2. These 4 findings in statute are as follows. 1. The public interest and necessity require the proposed project. 2. The proposed project is planned or located in a manner that will be most compatible with the greatest public good and the least private injury. 3. The property is necessary for the proposed project. And 4. An offer to acquire the property has been made to the owner of record. This item was originally an appearance request made by property owners George and Kimberly Morris. However, in accordance with the letter dated October 11th, 2021, and distributed as part of the additional meeting materials, the owner's representatives formally withdrew their objections to this resolution of necessity. Prior to moving to a vote for approval, I'd first like to ask if the property owners or the representatives are online and wishing to speak on this matter.
If the property owner is online and would like to speak, please use the raise hand feature so we can unmute you. Gurtej, we're not seeing anyone.
Thank you, Doug. Chair Norton, in light of this withdrawal of all objections, staff recommends the Commission move to vote the approval of this resolution of necessity, and staff recommends approval of this item.
Alvarado
Motion to approve.
staff recommendation.
Second.
Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Madam Chair, just to confirm, we have Alvarado as a motion and Davis at the second.
That's correct.
Thank you. Commissioner Alvarado,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Eager,
Aye.
Commissioner Falcone,
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino,
In the office?
Commissioner Inman,
Aye.
Commissioner Liu,
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Tavoloni, I believe Commissioner Tavaloni is having some microphone issues. Chair Norton.
Okay. Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you so much. We are now moving to item 58, the airspace lease. Gurtesh, this is you again.
Yes, Commissioners, tab 58 is an action item from Caltrans requesting to directly negotiate an airspace lease with a private entity known as the Best Demo and Recycling Company Incorporated. The proposed airspace to be negotiated for lease is in Los Angeles County. The Best Demo and Recycling Co. is a private recycling and demolition company that is currently leasing this airspace site through a holdover lease after its 5-year lease expired in September 2020. The private entity wishes to enter into a long-term lease with a term to be determined during negotiations and approved by the Commission at a future meeting. Staff has reviewed this item and recommends approval.
Okay, this is also an action item. Could we get a motion to approve?
So moved. Commissioner Eager?
Would you need a second?
Lou second.
Thank you. And we have no public comment on this item. Douglas, could you please read the roll? Eager, Lou, motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Alvarado,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Eager,
Aye.
Commissioner Falcone,
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby,
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino,
Aye.
Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Inman. We see you. Commissioner Martinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni, Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now we'll go to item 59, equity considerations for toll facilities. John?
Yep. Good morning, Commissioners. Item 59 is a presentation on equity as it relates to tolling facilities. A few months ago at the May CTC meeting, Caltrans gave a presentation on HOV lane degradation and how toll lanes are being used in some cases as a strategy to address HOV lane degradation. Following the presentation, there was some discussion on how equity is considered in tolling programs. So this presentation will specifically focus on how equity can and should be considered when considering new toll facilities. The presentation will be jointly presented by Caltrans and HNTB. HNTB is a consultant who has helped Caltrans, as well as other transportation agencies nationwide, with equity work on toll projects. Joe Rouse from Caltrans will be making the presentation. He's the one that also gave the presentation back in May. Joe Rouse is the program manager for managed lanes at Caltrans. And from HNTB, we will have Matt Click, Sam Sewells, and Lacey Vaughn. And so I will now turn it over to Joe so he can begin the presentation, and then he'll pass it on to the HNTB folks. Go ahead, Joe.
All right, good everyone, and thank you, John. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to the commission again on this topic. For those of you, again, who were not here for my last presentation, as John said, my name is Joe Rouse. I'm with the Division of Traffic Operations here at Caltrans, headquarters here in Sacramento. I'm the statewide program lead for managed lane operations, and I'm starting to transition actually into a new role where I'll be more focused on tolling and pricing policy and projects. I just was able to attend a 4-day conference down in Anaheim with the International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association. So that was a very interesting series of presentations and sessions that I attended, a lot focused on tolling, some discussions on equity, road user charge, Caltrans IBTTA, and it was really good to be able to meet others around the country who are trying to address some of the same issues that we'll be talking to you about today. So our state's transportation policymakers here in California, they've made it clear that we can and we need to do everything within our power to eliminate barriers to providing a more equitable transportation system for all Californians. And so with this in mind, it's really vital that whenever we're talking about applying tolls on public roads, such as price managed lanes, express lanes, we really need to ensure that that implementation is equitable and it involves meaningful community input. And you're going to hear a little bit about that today from the folks at HNTB. we really need to find ways to share the benefits of tolling, such as upgraded infrastructure, reduce congestion, and improve mobility. We need to find ways to share those benefits across all demographics, but we also need to reduce or mitigate those negative impacts, particularly in those communities who have historically suffered from past decisions made related to transportation. And as I said, the goal of our today's presentation is really to look at those past and current practices on the subject of equity as it relates to tolling. Can I get the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So I want to start, I think, with just a quick bit of background on tolling as it's used here in California. We have approximately 243 centerline miles of toll facilities just on the state highway system alone here in California in the form of bridges, toll roads, and these price managed lanes, what we commonly refer to as express lanes. The tolls on these facilities are collected and managed by various transportation agencies under authority granted to them either by the legislature or by the CTC. Caltrans is looking to possibly operate price managed lane facilities of their own. We've got a few districts that are interested in that. And so this is a subject that we are still talking about internally as to how we want to go about doing that, if we want to go about that. So traditionally, tolling has been used as a means to get new infrastructure, such as bridges, tolls, and roads built. Typically, we leverage the revenue stream that tolls generate over many years. Those revenues would also be reinvested back into the maintenance and the improvement of those facilities. That's still a common practice today. But more recently, there's been a shift towards using tolls as a means of managing demand to reduce congestion and improve travel time reliability, trip reliability. And revenue generation is typically a secondary objective in those cases. And when we see that type of tolling, it's typically known as pricing. Congestion pricing is what we typically see on the price managed lanes, the express lanes, as well as sometimes as on traditional facilities. We sometimes see it on traditional toll roads, toll bridges. And on these cases, the tolls are going to vary according to the time of day, the day of the week in some cases, and you usually see this on the express lanes. It may vary in real time according to the traffic conditions on the facility. Another form of pricing that we are starting to see is known as cordon pricing. And that's where tolls are charged to enter or drive within a congested area, usually a city center. So you may be aware that cordon pricing is being considered in portions of Los Angeles, Treasure Island in city and county of San Francisco. They will be using a cordon pricing approach to limit the amount of people that are entering that area. That's really the first cordon pricing project that will be going live here in California sometime within the next few years. I want to emphasize, speaking on behalf of Caltrans, that we're really interested in using tolling primarily as a way to better manage the transportation system. Revenue generation is a secondary objective. If we are able to obtain revenue that way, we will definitely use it to help augment our existing resources. But really, we see tolling and pricing as a tool to incentivize carpool and transit usage and maximize the operations of the corridor, because congestion pricing has generally been demonstrated to help really be effective in managing the transportation system. The revenues that would come in these cases would be used first to cover the cost of building and operating these transportation facilities, and any revenues that left over after those expenses are paid would then be used to fund projects and programs that ideally we hope would help the state to achieve its climate change goals. This use of tolling is what you'll see in CTP 2050, California Transportation Plan 2050, which includes a recommendation for pricing roadways to improve the efficiency of auto travel. And it's also mentioned in the recently released Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or as we all know it, working here in this area, CAPTI. Next slide, please. All right. So, whenever we look at implementing tolling, equity concerns are commonly raised, and they're typically analyzed as part of the studies for these projects. And over time, various programs and approaches have been implemented in response to these equity concerns. Some examples are the use of toll revenues to fund additional transit service, or establishing programs that can help people with low incomes to be able to established electronic toll collection accounts. The primary approach in these cases has been on minimizing negative and disproportionate impacts on these vulnerable communities. But in addition to this, we're starting to see some project sponsors now starting to explore how to maximize the benefits to these communities and redressing some of the historic or systemic inequities that have been created. And again, you'll be hearing a little bit more about that as we go on into this presentation. Next slide, please. All right, I would like to just briefly update you all on 3 things that Caltrans is doing in the area of equity in tolling. We are working on an update to our statewide managed lanes policy. And in that update, we are going to require equity analyses to be conducted for any project that's going to incorporate tolling. We also have language in there that really states that tolls should not place a disproportionate burden on low-income households. Secondly, we're preparing to launch a study on how toll facilities in California are being used, with a focus on the benefits that they provide to users and how these benefits are distributed among different user groups. This research is going to look at the usage patterns and the equity impacts associated with different income and geographic groups. We're modeling this study after a similar study that was recently completed in Washington State, and we're actually looking to use the same research team that they use from the University of Washington. As I previously mentioned, CAPTI supports the use of pricing as a strategy for managing vehicle miles traveled. The action items identified in CAPTI is the creation of a statewide roadway pricing working group. This working group is going to consist of other state agencies as well as our local and regional partners. And the goal of this working group is to identify and provide recommendations for equitable roadway pricing implementation pathways for strategies identified in the regional transportation plans of sustainable community strategies that aims to reduce or manage VMT. And I finally want to note that CTP 2050, as I mentioned earlier, includes a series of guiding principles for the use of tolling and pricing in California, several of those focusing on equity. These include addressing the needs of low and middle income populations and their ability to pay tolls, including those who have no alternative but to driving, investing in alternatives to driving that are safe, convenient, and affordable, and also considering the traffic impacts on nearby roadways and communities. Next slide, please. All right, and with this, I'd like to point out, as already been mentioned, we have a short presentation for you by HNTB Corporation on this topic. HNTB is a recognized leader in mobility equity, especially as it applies to tolled infrastructure. Their team of equity experts have helped clients understand the unique equity challenges associated with tolling and pricing projects and developing alternatives and implementing programs that mitigate those challenges in ways that best serve impacted communities. They're going to talk a little bit more about approaching equity and tolling, and they're going to share a couple of case studies on how this is being done with the new hot lanes in Route 101 in San Mateo County that are going to open to traffic before the end of this year. And so with this, I'd like to introduce Mr. Matt Click from HNTB to give their presentation. I've had the privilege of working with Matt for several years now on the TRB managed lanes. He's joined today by a couple of other representatives from HNTB, Ms. Samantha Souls and Ms. Lacey Vong. We were all able to meet at this IBTTA meeting that I mentioned at the outset presentation here. I know they're all ready and very happy to give you their presentation. I think you'll find it very informative. I will return after their presentation is concluded, and we'll be available to help answer any questions that the commissioners might have. Thank you very much. Matt?
Sure. Thank you, Joe, for that introduction. Could I get the next slide, please? And as Joe said, good morning. I'm Matthew Click. I'm HNTB's National Congestion Pricing Practice Lead. Today with me today are Samantha Souls and Lacey Vong. And the three of us have been working on equity inside of pricing and tolling for more than a decade, and want to, as Joe already mentioned, bring a couple case studies and lessons learned to you all this morning. Could I get the next slide? I will say this, you know, when we talk about equity in general or equity relative to transportation, there are so many issues we could, you know, work through and uncover, and we could do a week-long workshop on this. We are going to focus specifically on equity relative to tolling and pricing, and even more specifically relative to developing equity programs as part of pricing projects. So very practical, practitioner-based implementation experience and lessons learned for you all this morning. And then we'll get to your questions and answers. So we'll address equity. We'll talk about some examples. We'll talk about developing an equity program and operationalizing equity. Could I get the next slide? And I'll say, when you start to work through all of the issues associated with equity and pricing and tolling, there are literally hundreds of things to consider, decisions to be made. But I'll focus on 5 this morning to sort of get the conversation going. And these are really the big 5 from my perspective. And really the largest, and it's not a surprise, is who's going to have to pay the toll. If we're going to institute an express lane, cordon pricing, what have you, who is going to have to pay? Is it going to be one certain sort of vehicle class or others? And then wrapped into that is secondly, who is not going to pay or who is not going to pay the full toll or price? So who are we going to give discounts to? Are we going to have a pricing policy that allows high occupancy vehicles to travel for free or travel at some discounted rate? And are we going to vary that by what level of occupancy we are seeing? What about clean air vehicles? And this is an emerging issue where, there's a lot of conversation about, equity around how we price these vehicles today. I would say then, and Joe alluded to this a little bit, the third bullet, how much of a toll are you going to charge? Traditionally, public agencies engaged in pricing are really just charging enough to manage the traffic operations of a lane or corridor with pricing. They're just going to charge what they have to make sure they can have a reliable travel time and speed. Is that what you want to do? Or do you want to look at a pricing policy where you might charge more than that? You could have a revenue maximization policy, or you could have something less than that, but more than what's just needed for the traffic operations of the lane. And there's a trade-off to be made there. As you're generating more revenue, you of course will have more revenue to use and apply to other things, but it could create even a higher disproportionate burden on certain folks. So it's a consideration to be made. Fourth, I'll say, how are you going to charge the toll? This is something that practitioners focus on all of the time. Are you going to require folks who want to get access to your lane or into your geographic area that you're using pricing to control? Are they going to need a toll transponder? Are they going to need some sort of onboard unit? And if they are, how are you going to consider the needs of those of lower incomes or the unbanked? And fifth, and maybe the biggest, certainly one of them is where does that toll revenue go, and who is going to benefit from that toll revenue? And so when we look at all of these as part of the pricing policy, who are you going to charge? Who are you not going to charge? How are you going to charge them? And how are you going to apply those net revenues to the transportation system and potentially even outside of the transportation system? Next slide. I just want to point out that equity programs inside of pricing have evolved over time. And if we look at 3 projects at 3 distinct periods in time here, we'll start with the 95 express lanes in Miami going back to 2008. This was one of the earlier express lanes in the US. And it developed an equity program whereby express bus service, single seat bus service, was subsidized from Broward County into downtown Miami. And we point out that this was really the state of the practice back then, that most express lanes, when they thought about an expression of equity, it was through a transit subsidy. This was a very successful program. We saw an increase of 300% in ridership, and it enjoyed about $1 million a month in express bus subsidy from the express lanes. Looking to the second bullet, the Elizabeth River tolls. This is a project in Hampton Roads, Virginia, where there were 2 tolled tunnels bifurcating lower income neighborhoods, and equity program there was expressed in a toll discount where over 4,000 people a month on average were receiving discounted tunnel tolls right into their pocket. And then lastly, and bringing us to modern day, which we'll bring Lacey in to talk about, is the US 101 express lanes in San Mateo County, where here with this equity program, potential recipients of the equity program are actually going to be given a choice. And they're going to be able to individually choose how they want to receive their equity benefit. And we think that's very state of the practice. And with that, let me bring in Lacey to talk about that case study. Could we get the next slide, please? Lacey, it's all yours.
Thanks, Matt. I am happy to be here to share the experience of San Mateo with everyone today. So this is the experience of the new San Mateo US 101 express lanes, which will connect San Francisco to the Silicon Valley. This is a major investment in congestion management for the corridor, which is partly funded by SB1. So we really wouldn't be here talking about equity or this developing of this program without the state support. So our client, the San Mateo County Express Lanes Joint Powers Authority, they were formed as the decision-making body for the new express lanes. And at the heart of that is equity. The main questions they wanted to tackle were, how do we address transportation inequities beyond just the NEPA process? How can we provide a meaningful benefit to priority communities through an equity program to help move that needle? So there was a robust community engagement process that was undertaken. There were 5 channels of input, partnering with community-based organizations, interviews with local leaders, residents, key stakeholders. They formed an equity study advisory committee. We held over 20 public meetings throughout the county, had a general meeting in multiple languages. As you can see, there was a lot of material to publicize that in different languages, and a direct feedback channel. So the work was conducted in 2 phases. And I want to emphasize that because that first phase is really to understand the transportation mobility challenges of the community, and then coming back to them in the second phase and getting the input on equity program options to really understand what would be helpful. We're still in the process of developing that program. As Matt has talked about, we are looking at the feedback that we got really made us realize that choice was very important because of the diverse needs of communities. And so we'll see that as a key feature of the program. So I want to highlight just a couple of lessons of the many lessons and takeaways that we had. One being, I feel like the most important thing that we saw was leadership, the importance of leadership. The board of directors demonstrated a high level of commitment to equity. For example, we regularly saw them sharing in social media with their networks where the meetings were going to be at, encouraging people to attend, and they also showed up at those meetings. And then last, I want to emphasize that this process does take time, and actually a concerted effort to understand who we are trying to serve, what would be meaningful to them. We need to meet people where they are and be willing to pivot our plans to actively engage communities in the decision-making process for lasting solutions. So with that, I am going to turn it to Samantha Souls, who's going to talk about what MTC in the Bay Area is doing related to how you do equity in operations. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll turn it to Samantha.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really fortunate to be supporting an agency who recognizes how important and urgent this topic is and bring forward those lessons learned from our past experience, and just working with an agency that's already invested in creating an equity platform for the full MTC to support these kinds of projects. On top of that, the Bay Area Toll Authority has a wealth of experience from decades of operations, and that brings a perspective that understands what it really takes to carry out policy changes and how policies drive cost and customer experience and ultimately the equitable results that we're seeking. The current efforts, which are also mid-stride, include a review of policies and data in an effort to identify potential inequities from policies that have been on the books for quite some time and determine how best to modify the fast-track programs in order to meet modern needs of toll customers. And of course, the outreach is key to hitting the target here. But also, since this service center collects millions in revenue and interacts with thousands of customers on a daily basis, when you take that and you deploy any kind of change, it's high risk. And so BETA has to really look at it from all angles and do a lot of diligence in their planning process to see what the financial, legal implications are, the perspectives of regional partners that also operate using the back office service center in order to successfully put practices into operation. And this is particularly true for estimating costs of these programs really early in the planning phase. So I think the takeaway here is that when you think about writing a policy, just being able to really strongly consider how it goes from paper to real life will ultimately result in fewer surprises in operations. And it also improves the chances that you'll be able to meet the spirit of the policy as it's implemented and put into ops. So that's all I have. So next slide, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And with Joe, we'll turn it back to you to manage Q&A.
Okay.
Okay, so we can ask questions with commissioners. I think we have a couple of our commissioners who are in line, and then I have some questions myself. What I wanted to do was start with our vice chair, Bob Alvarado. Commissioner Alvarado? Are you on mute, maybe?
There we go. So obviously I got a couple of questions. Now we're changing from toll lanes, like you mentioned, Matthew and Joe both, moving from toll lanes to facilitate a commute to now lanes that you're going to use to manage traffic. That's a big difference to me. Now, that's kind of like congestion pricing the downtown San Francisco is looking at. Because now, especially since we're talking about equity, you have to consider, for me, the big question is what is considered low income? Now, construction workers aren't really considered, and I'll just use us as an example, aren't really considered low income. But you're going to impact these folks, I think, a lot because they can't afford to live where they work. So for us, you're talking about that Tracy, Modesto, that Valley area coming into the Bay Area to work. If you're going to use this tool to manage traffic, now you're really putting a burden on somebody who technically isn't considered low income, but who's struggling to make things work. So I'm really, really concerned about how we interpret and manage low income. And then as we set up these meetings, and we'll just use San Mateo as an example, you're looking at MTC holding hearings for this managed lane in San Mateo, when most of those people that are going to be commuting are coming from Gilroy and Salinas and south of San Jose. So, your outreach has to become a lot greater. If you're going to use 580 as a managed lane, then you're going to have to hold meetings out in the Valley and not in Alameda County and San Francisco County. So I'm really kind of concerned about how we're going to set this up so that we don't impact middle-class folks. I said it during CAPTI, middle-class and low-income people commute. That's just the fact of life. We cannot afford to live where we work. I want to make sure that we look at all angles before we start setting prices, especially, again, like Joe, you said, toll roads traditionally, those tolls go to pay for maintenance and pay off a construction bond. This is different. Just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Alvarado. I think you bring up some very good points. I do just want to cite a couple of things I'm personally aware of that are hopefully trying to address some of what you raised. You specifically mentioned the 580 corridor. I do know that Caltrans District 4 and Caltrans District 10 and our regional transportation partners on both sides of the Altamont Pass are starting to form a working group that is exploring the possibility of extending the existing express lanes we have on 580, extending them over the pass and over into the Central Valley, and what that could mean in terms of the operations. And I'm certain that as part of those discussions, equity and the impacts on the folks traveling those longer distances will certainly be part of what we talk about. I'll also point out that, as I mentioned in my presentation, we are working on an update to our managed lanes policy, and we are going to have some equity language in there. And as you were bringing your point up, I think it might be worthwhile for us to make sure that the language that we're planning to put in there does address the scenario that you described about some of these longer distance commuters. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm definitely going to take that under advisement. So I really appreciate you bringing that point up. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to what Commissioner Alvarado has raised here.
I'll just quickly chip in that I absolutely agree with you, Commissioner, and I'll just say at a very high level, you know, lots of times when we do this sort of work, a lot of folks will want to focus on the quantitative. They will want to focus on the technical, as far as sort of the analysis and, you know, econometric modeling and things like that. It is my personal experience that it is the soft, squishy stuff that takes a long time. And Lacey talked about this in her presentation, and doing the work, doing the hard work of getting out into the communities, you know, to understand what their needs are, understand what their transportation challenges are, specifically to you know, take that input as part of the equity program development is essential to it is absolutely essential to the success of the eventual program. And it often takes more time and more resources than you think it's going to, but at the end of the day, it's what you need to do to have a successful program. And, you know, we used to use language like buy-in a long time ago, and I don't really like that language anymore. I think it had its place, but it's really about collaboration and co-creation of these programs with the communities, because really, if we're talking about a linear express lane, yeah, it is really servicing multiple communities based on the commute shed that it serves. And so you have to understand what that is, and then, you know, structure outreach and program development around that. And I'll just quickly say, I also agree with you around income. We originally were looking at a federal poverty level standard as part of the income for San Mateo. After talking with the communities, the feedback we got is that's too low. There's not enough of us that would qualify under that standard. You know, so we listened and we heard that. And we talked with health service agencies who do this good work, who are in these communities, partnering with agencies such as Samaritan House and getting their counsel. And as a result of that, we proposed to our board to go to 60% of AMI. And that is currently what our income eligibility will be at. So it'll be north of 70,000. So just, I fully agree with your comments. So Joe, back to you.
And you got to understand too, when you do your outreach, and we'll just use that 580 corridor again as an example. You got people with a 2.5 hour commute in and a 3.5 hour commute out. So your typical 9 to 5 outreaches, you're not going to reach anybody. They're still in their car.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to figure out a way to reach these folks who are, and all you have to do is look at 580 either way and either commute time. And there's a lot of folks on the road. They're not going to be able to attend any kind of a meeting. We're going to have to find a different way to reach those folks and engage them.
Absolutely. And I need to point out that, we had an equity study performed. We sit as the policy program manager to the JPA. We wrote a scope of work and hired Arup consultants to do an equity study for us. And they brought a sub-consultant from Los Angeles called Estelano Advisors. And one of the key things that Estelano brought to us were some of their best practices from Los Angeles. And one of those was the utilization of community-based organizations for outreach. And so we, working with them, they reached out directly to CBOs, and we used them as gateways into their communities because they knew best how to reach them. And so I think one of the things we've learned as a best practice is not just partnering with community-based organizations, but paying them for their time to help us get into their communities is something we should really think about doing more of.
Thank you very much. We have some additional questions. One from Commissioner Falcon, and then after her questions, I'll be asking a few. Currently, we have no public comment. Commissioner Falcon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. And I appreciate this presentation very much. And I liked what Lacey said about, it takes leadership and equity. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. It's such a complex topic, this one. I mean, it speaks to land use. It speaks to, the housing prices near urban areas and where you work. And each region is trying to do better and figuring that, how we manage that. But in the meantime, I really appreciate Vice Chair Alvarado's comments. Absolutely. And I mean, in San Diego, I can say that it's gotten so expensive to live near the urban core, and, trying to get our folks to their place of work. I mean, they're coming from all over, not only from South County, North County, they're coming from Temecula and on the other south of the border to get to their place of work in San Diego. So I agree. There's going to be a lot of robust community engagement work that's going to need to happen. We heard an update yesterday from the Equity Advisory group folks, and we talked about how we can engage them more meaningfully and intentionally. And just wondering from CTC staff if this is an issue that at some point, when appropriate, we can bring this up to them, and if they can get engaged in this issue.
Mitch or Joe, do you want to talk about, or John, do you want to talk about the possibility of us doing a workshop? I think it's a great idea. We've talked about it in previous meetings about doing a workshop on tolling and equity and just tolling in general, especially since the whole issue of tolling lanes and congestion pricing is really a key element of CAPDI and maybe a key funding source for transit operations in the state.
Yeah, well, that's why I popped on. We'll have to engage our worlds are colliding, on our staff level, Laura and Sequoia, who are doing the equity work, and then Joe, and then I have little managed lanes. And when the equity world, we try to intertwine it with all these normal operational stuff we do, it's great conversations. So I think what we can do is go back and work with Laura and Sequoia and our equity people who are engaging with the equity roundtable and see how these discussions would fit in best for that. So we'll work on that.
Okay, great. I have some questions, and I know Commissioner Inman just requested to ask some questions, but I feel like we need to be talking more about equity, not only in how you pay, but in what is done with the funds. And I think that as part of the equity conversation, we can't just assume that all the people that are in vehicles right now are able to get into transit that will make the same trip. And so a question I have on two elements, because this is one of my favorite topics from my experience in working on the express lanes in Los Angeles. One, we have more people, as Commissioner Alvarado was saying, that need to use their vehicles for work because they carry tools, they may be gardeners, they may be carrying supplies. We can't assume that every driver can easily go on transit because the vehicle may be part of their business. And so I was wondering if there is potentially a commercial registration that allows someone who needs their vehicle for work to have some kind of special registration to be able to use the lanes. And it may be at a different, we do so for zero emission, but to essentially recognize that some people must have a vehicle in order to move and to get to and from work. And that vehicle may have to have specialized equipment in it. So that's question one. Question two is, again, in your outreach, are we also looking at, with communities that are going to need to pay instead of for the privilege of driving, why can't we also look at meeting the needs and identifying where the toll revenues go to fund maybe unique transit opportunities that are maybe not present right now, and that's why people are driving, so that there is a direct link in the equity space to say, are many people having to get in cars because they just don't have the bus route, they don't have the train route that's going to get them where they need to go, and maybe we need to be prioritizing net toll revenue to invest in those things if we're essentially going to be now requiring more money to be spent if you're in a vehicle. So those are my two questions.
Yeah, let me go ahead and I'll start with that, and then I'm going to ask Sam to come in and finish up on question one, and I'll have Lacey address question two relative to what we did in San Mateo. I will say before I ask Sam to talk about the commercial account act question, it is exactly why with San Mateo, and we didn't get into it because of time, but the two benefits that folks will be able to choose between will either be a preloaded Clipper card with a value of $100, or a fast track transponder with an equal amount of money on it. Because and it was a balance of not just what we heard as part of our outreach, but also trying to achieve policy goals. Ideally, we do want to encourage people to remain in a high occupancy state or get on transit. But we do recognize that there are a lot of folks who are going to want to use the express lanes because, other ways of moving around aren't meeting their needs, or they are a commercial sort of the person with the van sort of service provider, that they're going to need the express lanes. And they could choose a transponder option. Or if there was someone who says, I don't own a car, so if you only give me a transponder option, I can't avail myself of this equity program. Well, they can get it through the transit subsidy. And so that is exactly why we structured it that way. Sam, do you want to talk about commercial accounts? And then Lacey, if you take on the second part of the question.
Yeah, commercial accounts could be a really wide definition, so I'm gonna box it in a few different ways. First of all, the importance of outreach, and we do this with major employers, as well as the community members for this reason, that if you have a business that is, say, a delivery business or catering, and where driving and having a vehicle is obviously not a good fit for being on transit, then being able to speak to those business owners as well as the community members around them that may be employed by them, and it's an important effort. And I think that what we really strive for is a process in that communication and outreach that doesn't make assumptions. Anecdotally, one could find that a plumber, say, who's not low income would not qualify necessarily for an income-based discount, but drives a truck, would find the cost of an express lane, for example, very valuable, and would want to have that trip reliability to be able to conduct their business day to day with less traffic. And we have found anecdotally, this is decades old, but that that a lot of those individuals that really time is money, that toll in exchange for being able to not have traffic in that lane is actually a value to them. And so we try not to go in with those assumptions. Secondly, on fleet vehicles, operationalizing those policies is very doable with technology. So when we look at it from a delivery standpoint, I think the architecture of the Bay Area, for example, is really well set up to be able to navigate that. It does take time and money, but there's also other ways that's not a discount. And I'll give the example of Texas, and SH 130 was really built as a truck corridor. The Trucking Association wasn't really a fan of paying tolls. But they really did that for a shift away from I-35, which had a lot of safety issues. And what they did was they allowed overnight half-price tolls to allow the trucking associations to put their trucks on a route that was safer at a less congested time. And that benefited not only the communities near both I-35 and 130, but the environment, safety improvements, as well as their trucking speeds. So I think it's really a conversation, it's a negotiation, and it has to really be tailored to the end users.
Thank you very much. With that, I'd like to move to Commissioner Inman, who is dressed beautifully, and for her questions.
Thank you, Chair Norton. A couple of questions or suggestions. So one, to tie back to the discussion we had yesterday about real-time data and using relevant information, to Commissioner Alvarado or Vice Chair Alvarado's point, I think we really got to drill down and look at those super commuters and see what's going on in their lives. I've taken the opportunity just in my day job, my retail team has all those tools. So I decided I was going to try to understand the super commuters of the Bay Area. And so I would encourage you really, and then you've got to go to them. You can't expect them, as Vice Chair Alvarado said, they're not going to be at the traditional outreach meeting time. And if you think that you're working a long day and then adding 4 or 5 hours onto your commute, frankly, you're probably going to go have track them down on the soccer field on Saturday or someplace that fits into whatever else they're trying to do in their busy lives. And then I wanted to speak on behalf of the working parents, because I can go way back in my personal career and being a mom, and it was $5 a minute every minute I was late picking up the kids from childcare. I can't imagine what that number is today. It's probably $10 or $15 a minute. But I think we really have to look at those working families and think about their needs too. And we know that childcare is a huge issue in our workforce today. And if the tolls, I mean, I look at the 91 toll and that hot lane is up to $20 sometimes. And I'm thinking, can they afford to really put that on there? But those are the kind of folks, in my opinion, that we need to really be able to serve. So I think you really are going to have to take a deep dive. And the same thing with those working parents. They're probably not going to take time out to go to a workshop. And what our equity partners have said to us over and over again, you can't expect us to come to you. You need to go. So whether you all go to the faith-based institutions and develop relationships there, I would assume that the sports fields on the weekends would be a good place to meet folks that are having some of these issues. But I think there's a lot, and so I really want to encourage us to really be holistic when we have these discussions. And then when you talk about fleets, I'm not sure that trucks are allowed in those managed lanes. So let's make sure. It seems to me that a lot of our designs are pretty tight on those managed lanes, and I'm not sure we can roll too many of the trucks through those lanes. So I'm not sure what kind of fleets we would really be working with. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Inman. You are correct. I will point out that in many cases, these lanes are on the left side of the freeway and they are not usually open to large trucks. due to the vehicle code restrictions. But I do know that we have cases, particularly down in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area, where we will have operators like UPS. They will utilize those facilities. Those trucks are small enough, dare I say, to use the HOV lanes. In hearing your comments, I'm thinking about this study that we're about to embark on hopefully with the University of Washington, if we can get everything worked out that way. I think some of the things that you and Commissioner Alvarado have raised are definitely worth exploring. One of the things that we do plan to do is to work with the study that was done in Washington State and that we're hoping to replicate here. What they did was they actually used account information from in this case, Washington State DOT. They manage the toll accounts and the operations there. We don't. We would have to work with our regional partners that operate the local fast track programs across the state. But what they did was they used just some general information from each of those transponders in terms of where those people lived, and in terms of the zip code and the census data, to really try to get a better understanding of who was using the lanes and how much they were paying to use them. So we're going to be looking at that sort of thing through this study. I'm fairly certain that the information that we collect from the toll agencies as we embark on this study will help us to identify who's actually using the lanes and give us a better picture of what's actually going on out there. So I think as we complete this study, I'm just going to throw this out there. It might be worthwhile for us to come back and share the findings of that study with the commission, maybe once it's completed. I can't offer you a time frame for when that study is going to be completed because we're still trying to figure out the scope of work and the schedule, but I'm definitely going to keep that in my back pocket as an option, that whenever that study is done and we have some meaningful results to share with you all, we could probably put that forward. So I'll work with John and the CTC staff on that as we continue to work on that contract. But I'm hoping that will help us to really identify some of the issues that have been discussed here. I will say this, when we think about equity, at least, and I'm speaking for myself, I think we often think of the communities that are directly impacted by that circle the project, whatever it is that we're working on. But I am finding the reminder here, and hearing from all of you, we need to be thinking about the communities far beyond just the local project. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think our managed lanes policy that we're working on, the equity language that we have in there, there may be an opportunity to perhaps incorporate some of what you're raising here in that policy. So that's definitely something I'm going to take back as well.
Okay, but you might circle with our Hannah and Matthew at CTC, who have been doing a fantastic job of drilling down into really trying to get all of us really good information. And in particular, in this case, we're looking at freight data, but working with the research team at the Army Corps of Engineers, we have met a bunch of experts scattered around the US, and they do the causal analysis. So I think, to Vice Chair Alvarado's point, make sure that you're looking at those super commuters. I mean, it breaks my heart to think that we even have that category. I think for all of us in the transportation world, our mutual goal would be to not have that be a relevant category that's populated by anybody. But the reality, as former Commissioner Gometti taught us, you drive till you qualify, still applies. Yes. Unfortunately, those distances are elongated. And, most of those folks are not the folks that are able to do the remote work. And so I think really getting some really good data. And then I want to make sure that you look at our working parents, because most of our families are dual income and it's tough. I mean, I don't know how they make it work today, but certainly make sure that we don't ignore those categories. Thank you.
One other question I'd actually like to ask, and I'm not sure if there's anybody here on the Caltrans side who may be able to help answer that question. I did mention this external pricing working group that's being formulated under CAPDI. Quite frankly, I don't know where we are in terms of formulating that, but I don't know if there's members of the commission who are possibly going to be appointed to that group. Does anybody have any information to share on that? I wish I had an answer. Unfortunately, I don't. But I think given some of the things that have been raised here today, it might be worthwhile to perhaps have some folks from the commission as part of that group. So,
Mitch, can we ask you to speak on that and potentially request that we be part of that committee?
Well, I could do two things. First of all, we can ask if anyone is on the line from CalSTA to answer the question. And barring that, we can certainly reach out to them with the request from the commission to participate in that.
Okay, so first, is there anyone from CalSTA who is on the line that can speak to the makeup of the ad hoc on road pricing? Okay. Well, I think we're going to move to thank you, Mitch, and appreciate it. And I'm going to move to Commissioner Eager's question, and perhaps we'll hear from CalSTA in the interim.
Thank you, Chair Norton. First of all, I just want to say that I'm encouraged, certainly, by this discussion. And Joe, your willingness to look at other issues and be open is very refreshing. So let me tell you how much I appreciate that. I would like to go back to Vice Chair Alvarado's discussion about these mega commuters and folks that actually don't have another option. Here in the Central Valley, we don't have a way to get to the Bay Area or Southern California other than getting in your car if you have a job. We're training a lot of folks here in the Central Valley to work in other parts of the state, and they won't be in a truck, and it's not because, you know, they're carrying something, it's commercial, whatever, that they can't get on public transportation. There is no public transportation. So as they get on those roads and use these facilities that you're working on, please keep that population in mind, is that absolutely someday we certainly hope that there is some way to get them to these jobs that they're training for other than being in these cars. But please keep those folks in mind when you're looking at doing that outreach and looking at who qualifies for using these lanes. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So noted. You know, as I'm hearing the discussion here, I'm coming to the conclusion that and Matt, maybe you can elaborate on this, given your national experience, and particularly I know your past experience in Florida. Are there other states that you know of that have had the super commute scenario that we seem to have here in California, with people traveling these longer distances to our major job centers? Is that unique to us?
It's not completely unique to you. I think Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. has it to a degree. I think there is some of that in New York, but, you know, I haven't looked at traffic statistics on this in a long time, Joe. But as I understand it, Southern and Northern California and the percentage of super commuters in those two regions, it's the vast majority of them in the U.S. are in these two places. That's not to say it does not exist in other markets. Like I said, the 395 express lanes go for almost 40 miles south of Washington, D.C. into suburban and even rural Virginia, and they do quite well. So there is a super commute pattern in and around the D.C. area for the same reasons, because of housing and land value. But it's you know, San Francisco and LA have a bunch of that. But it is why, for instance, like in Miami, speaking of Florida, though we wouldn't have called it some super commuter based on the average commute time. You know, we did reach into, you know, adjacent counties as part of the outreach, not just you know, mainly through planning partners, MPOs, and things like that.
Thank you. I know I could kind of put you on the spot there.
Okay.
So I could certainly work with the folks that I know who have, been involved with the projects in Virginia, and maybe there's some information that I could glean on how they're addressing some of these issues as well. But I'm seeing a very good opportunity here with our policy, as I've mentioned a few times already. I think we've got a very good opportunity here to maybe try to at least daylight some of these issues in our policy, so as we and our partners work on these projects, that we are aware of these things collectively together. So again, I really appreciate the feedback from you all on the commission on this. It's been very enlightening for me, so I thank you for that.
Mr. Rouse, before we end today, Commissioner Falcone raised a really good point, which is that in the San Diego, Southern California area, we have people who are crossing the border each day to get into and out of job opportunities and into and out of the state for those job opportunities. And so to make sure that that outreach includes people who are essentially working in the US but living outside the US and needing to commute every day, and that's very prevalent and another key part of the equity conversation. So if we can make a note of that, and Mitch will follow up with you and with John to look at a workshop, and also to work with CalSTA to make sure that CTC is represented on any of the future ad hoc commission or committees that are discussing road pricing to this level and equity, and our work with the Equity Roundtable. So we want to thank you. This is a very important and comprehensive presentation today. You can tell it's heavy on our minds, but this is really, really helpful that you were willing to dig deep and provide some real life examples for us. So we thank you very much for that.
Thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you again to our colleagues from HNTV. I've had the privilege of working with these folks for several years now, and I personally believe they're the best in the business, and I'm glad they were able to come talk to you today as well. So Matt, Lacey, Sam, thank you very much.
Well, you just got a nice statewide plug, HNTV. So thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you, Joe. And we will move now because there's no public comment, onto item 60. Thanks again. Matthew, Senate Bill 1 semi-annual report.
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton, and good morning, commissioners. Tab 60 is an information item containing the Senate Bill 1 semi-annual progress report for the period from January 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2021. I would now like to introduce my colleague Angel Pyle, Caltrans SB1 Program Manager, who will be presenting this item. Angel, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Matthew, appreciate it. Good morning, Madam Chair, Executive Director Weiss, and Commissioners. My name is Angel Pyle, and I have the privilege of being the department's SB1 Program Manager. And I'm here today to present the department's SB1 semi-annual report for your consideration. In this presentation, I'll provide a few program updates. Oh, I'm sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. In this presentation, I'll provide a few program updates, offer a look ahead of what's to come, and also highlight a few recently completed SB1 projects. Next slide, please. While there are additional SB1 funded programs, here's a reminder of the programs that are covered underneath this or under this semi-annual report. So we have the Solutions for Congested Corridor Program, the Trade Corridor Program, the Local Partnership Program, both the formulaic and the competitive, the Active Transportation Program, and the SHOP. Next slide, please. I'm happy to report we have over 700 projects in progress with a total of $2.7 billion in awarded projects in these programs. We also have over 386 SHOP projects with construction allocations, and 123 of those projects have completed construction, with 263 of those projects also receiving construction allocations. This represents investments of over $7 billion. Next slide, please. Thank you. These programs continue to create infrastructure which will provide benefits to Californians for years to come. I'd like to highlight a few of the outputs. SB1 is supporting the creation of 210 HOV lanes and 67 miles of new or rehabilitated track within the Congested Corridor Program. We're also supporting 74 rehab lane miles and over 40 transit vehicles within the local partnership program. We're also supporting 16 grade separations and 34 miles of auxiliary lanes, which will help in, which will assist in moving goods across the state. I'd like to also note that this is not the only program in which grade separations are supported. We'll have additional information forthcoming in the future in response to questions from the previous semi-annual report. I'll also highlight a grade separation completed later in this presentation. Next slide, please. For the active transportation program, I'd like to highlight we are supporting the completion of more than 1,300 lane miles of bike lanes, over 450 miles of new or improved sidewalk, and over 120 miles of multi-use trails. These investments, the investments in these programs provide significant benefits to Californians. We are moving towards capturing the benefits of these investments, and we'll have those available in future reports to the Commission. I'd also like to mention that the department recently added additional quality control measures and review surrounding the semi-annual report. And through this additional review, we noticed a few anomalies in the output data contained in the report. We're currently performing additional analysis and we'll revise the report once updated information is available, as well as keeping the Commission staff updated as well. Next slide, please. SB1 also included specific performance criteria for core assets on the state highway system. Progress towards these goals were most recently updated in June by Asset Management and the Performance Benchmark Report update. However, we've also included the slide for you here for your convenience. Next slide, please. A few things you'll see in future reports are more emphasis on project completions and outcomes. We're also excited to highlight projects in upcoming presentations, and we're starting that even with this presentation today. So we're very excited to present 3 project completions or discuss those today. Next slide, please. Great. So the first project that I'd like to highlight is an ATP project in the city of Baldwin Park. This is a 1.3-mile route along Main Avenue in the city of Baldwin Park in Los Angeles County. This city corridor is used by pedestrians and bicyclists alike for commuting to work and to 4 schools within the vicinity of this route. Prior conditions included curb ramps and adjoining sidewalk that were not ADA compliant, and you can see that in the picture here. This required pedestrians to enter a vehicular lane of travel while crossing the street and bicycles sharing the roadway with vehicles. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this project included reducing the roadway from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, which is sometimes known as a road diet, and using that added width to create class 4 bike lanes and also bring curb ramps up to full ADA compliance and add intersection bulb outs, which provide additional space for pedestrians and also bicyclists, and other complete streets elements such as pedestrian countdown signals and additional crosswalk markings as well. All of these improvements have created safer and more accessible routes for active transportation in this historically disadvantaged community. The project cost for this project was a little over $1 million and was fully funded by the ATP. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second project that I'd like to highlight is one of our first trade corridor projects which have completed. So we're truly excited to talk about this today. This is a grade separation at the Port of Stockton. This project reduces delays. In fact, you can see here in the top middle portion of your screen, this is the picture of the crossing prior to the project. And in the bottom right, you can see this is what it looks like today. There were delays of travelers and rail movement, and some people recall waiting up to 20 minutes to traverse this crossing. I'm very happy to report this grade separation supports reduced delays as well as reduced greenhouse gas emissions as a result of idling, and most importantly, improves safety by separating the crossing. I'd also like to pass along some comments that the port shared last week during the ribbon cutting. They have recently deployed more than 36 zero-emission heavy forklifts and 1 railcar mover, and they installed 30 chargers to support their zero-emission goals. Also of note, the soil material used for the grade separation came directly from the ship channel, resulting in significant air quality benefits. Similar material is also being used downriver from the port to reestablish sand dune habitat for an endangered butterfly and 2 endangered plant species. We'd like to congratulate the port on this completion. Next slide, please. Thank you. The last project I'll highlight today is also an ATP project. This particular project is a non-infrastructure project. However, it also provides significant benefits to the community that we're truly excited to talk about today. The Shasta Safe Routes to School program serves 3 school districts in the county and encourages school children to walk and bike safely to school. Thanks to a $450,000 ATP grant, this program was able to hold regular walk to school bike and school days. It was able to establish 4 walking school bus groups. They were also able to hold after-school bike safety programs. This provided bike safety classes to 6th graders at 4 schools and also pedestrian safety classes to 2nd graders at 8 schools. This program supported an open streets event to showcase 6 blocks of newly built sidewalk in Reading. And these events drew in approximately 3,000 participants and invited safety knowledge for walkers and bikers, as well as increased parent participation for the Safe Routes to School program. One of the schools also partnered with a local cycling education organization and bought 12 bikes to support the after-school bike safety program at 7 schools. So very excited about that. So next slide, please. So with that, that concludes my presentation today. I've kept it a little bit more brief in the interest of time. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain those now. And I'd also like to thank you for your time today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for a very thorough presentation. Justin, do we have any public comments on this item?
Chair Norton, I see no attendees indicating they wish to make public comment at this time. Thank you.
Okay, and commissioners, are there any of you who wish to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for a really informative item. Looking forward to our next presentation. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you for your time, appreciate it.
Wonderful. Now we're going to move to item 61, the Caltrans Stormwater Permit Cost Assessment Update. Tim?
Thank you, Chair Norton. Good morning, Commissioners. Tab 61 is an informational item. There are 2 statewide stormwater permits currently under reissuance by the State Water Resources Control Board. The Caltrans National Pollutant Elimination Discharge System Permit, and the Construction General Permit. During the June and August CTC meetings, Caltrans provided updates on the status of these permits as well as the impacts of the proposed permit revisions. During the August CTC meeting, the Commission requested Caltrans to come back to the October CTC meeting to provide an update on their assessment of the cost of compliance to the department for both permits. Ken Johansson from the Caltrans Division of Environmental Analysis is here to provide the cost assessment update. Ken, are you there?
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, Madam Chair, Executive Director Weiss, and Commissioners. The objective of this presentation is to disclose the refined Caltrans compliance cost assessments for the 2 stormwater permits under reissuance by Caltrans partner agency, the State Water Resources Control Board. My name is Ken Johansson. I'm the Caltrans statewide stormwater coordinator and Clean California program manager, and it is my honor to return to present on behalf of Caltrans. I am joined today by the Caltrans Chief Environmental Engineer, Hardeep Thakkar, who will be available for questions at the conclusion of this presentation. As indicated by Tim, the statewide stormwater permit, formerly known as the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, regulates stormwater runoff from Caltrans operation and maintenance activities associated with the state highway system. At the August 19th CTC meeting, the Caltrans Stormwater Program presented on the statewide stormwater permit only and provided a generic percent range in the increase in the cost to comply with new permit provisions. This follow-up presentation is in response to the Commissioners and Executive Officer request to provide more detailed and refined cost assessment numbers. Since the August CTC meeting, Caltrans met with our CTC and State Water Board partners to facilitate a transparent dialogue on Caltrans funding needs required to comply with the stormwater permit requirements, and to receive feedback on the assumptions used to determine the anticipated costs associated with the baseline 2012 permit, subsequent regulatory actions, and new provisions within the statewide stormwater permit under reissuance. The book item on this topic contains a more robust technical presentation of the cost projections and associated risks and opportunities that result in uncertainty and thus are assigned a range of potential cost impacts. The second permit that will be covered in this presentation is the Construction General Permit, which regulates sediment-laden stormwater discharges from active construction sites, along with other pollutants of concern that attach to sediment. Caltrans has been focused for more than 20 years in the area of stormwater quality management. Caltrans continues to strive to ensure that surface and groundwater resources are protected and managed in a sustainable manner for future generations. Caltrans, alongside our state and regional water board partners, will continue to advance mutual environmental stewardship goals as we enter into the next evolution of our stormwater program by fostering partnerships with the regulatory community and prioritizing implementation efforts that yield benefits to underserved communities. Next slide, please. We're going to start with the statewide stormwater permit that regulates, again, the operation and maintenance of the state highway system in the post-construction condition. The permit is expected to be adopted early in 2022. I like to compartmentalize this permit into two Caltrans treatment obligations. One, stormwater treatment requirements for new pavement or redevelopment projects so as to not cause or contribute to water quality impacts. Number two, stormwater treatment retrofit requirements for legacy water quality impacts known as total maximum daily load watersheds, in which Caltrans is a named responsible party amongst others. These costs will be broken down into various buckets on the next slide. Stormwater runoff quality is improved through construction of treatment devices, also known as permanent best management practices, that remove pollutants such as trash and metals when rain events result in runoff being conveyed through these devices, such as biofiltration swales or media filters, and pollutants are scrubbed out by the vegetation or stormwater volume prevented from reaching waterways through infiltration into the ground. So before we get into the cost details, let me start by saying that over the course of the last 2+ years, the Caltrans Stormwater Program has been collaborating with the State Water Board and 9 regional boards in good faith in the development of a permit that meets our mutual environmental stewardship goals. Caltrans continues to engage with these partners to maximize opportunities for developing cost-effective compliance strategies, leverage the Clean California Initiative, which I'll go into more detail later, and to minimize the risk of permit non-compliance and the associated enforcement actions that could result in unanticipated costs. The Caltrans Cost of Compliance Assessment has facilitated productive interagency dialogue regarding the increasing regulatory landscape over time that have sharply widened the Caltrans funding gap between actual compliance needs and Caltrans budget allocations committed to stormwater compliance objectives. Caltrans is the largest municipal stormwater discharger in California. However, at the same time, we are the most physically constrained in terms of ability to accommodate the design and construction of treatment devices in a high-speed freeway environment land use that is linear and narrow in nature. This point will become more apparent in subsequent slides as we discuss Caltrans challenges and the need for permit flexibilities to meet our obligation to restore water quality from legacy impacts, again referred to as TMDLs, which have prescriptive compliance states and discharge loading targets. So let me walk you through this table. As you will notice, rows A through G, as indicated on the left side, represent the various high-level compliance response action categories resulting in compliance response actions, such as row A, which represents cost of stormwater treatment devices needed to restore severe water quality impairments from legacy impacts. These devices result in quantified pollutant load reductions. Rows B, C, and D represent trash capture devices and maintenance measures to collect litter and maintain those trash capture devices. Row E represents costs for stormwater treatment devices to address new pollutant loading from new or reconstructed pavement to ensure no new impairments occur to water bodies. Row F are stormwater requirements for maintenance facilities, and row G are program administration costs. So let's start with the baseline funding needs associated with the existing 2012 permit, which is represented by column 1, which total to just north of $500 million annually, with a $400 million shop-specific need. Column 2 represents Caltrans stormwater obligations associated with regulations and enforcement actions that were adopted after the issuance of the Caltrans 2012 statewide stormwater permit. These stormwater regulations are all associated with meeting trash control requirements. To elaborate, the 2017 statewide trash provisions and the 2019 District 4 trash cease and desist order will be formalized into the 2021 statewide stormwater permit. The trash control requirements in column 2 roll up to an annual Caltrans compliance funding need of between 230 and 330 million, with an annual shop specific need of between 190 and 290 million. The next slide will go into more details on the timeliness, assumption costs, and opportunities for cost-effective compliance strategies. Column 3 represents Caltrans stormwater obligations associated with the new stormwater permit requirement specific to lowering of the new pavement threshold that triggers stormwater treatment devices to mitigate for new project impacts, and the revised permit provisions that limit cost-effective regional partnership project opportunities that generate compliance for Caltrans' response to restoring legacy water quality impacts. Reducing the treatment trigger for redevelopment projects or new or reconstructed pavement from 1 acre to 10,000 square feet will result in a $10 million increase over the 2012 baseline, as shown in square E3. Limiting Caltrans funded regional partnership opportunities that yield economies of scale could result in a $70 million increase over baseline compliance projections, as shown in square A3. So the takeaway from this slide is that the total annual stormwater compliance funding needs rolls up to between 860 million and 1 billion, as shown in square H4, with an annual shop-specific need of between 660 million and 780 million, as shown in square I4. Caltrans currently allocates between 300 million to 330 million out of the shop budget to meet stormwater compliance obligations. Caltrans is currently projecting an increased shop funding gap of between 360 million and 450 million to fulfill stormwater compliance obligations when compared against the Caltrans stormwater shop needs and the Caltrans shop allocation. Next slide. On this slide, I will start by identifying key differences in Caltrans' implementation strategy to comply with the 64 TMDL areas throughout the state associated with Caltrans' contribution, amongst other discharges that have resulted in water quality impacts from legacy pollutant loading. I will outline Caltrans' compliance strategy to construct stormwater treatment devices under the existing permit and the implementation adjustments needed to comply with the TMDL time schedule order within the proposed permit. The revised Caltrans implementation strategy will result in an increased funding needs to construct treatment devices on Caltrans right-of-way to improve water quality runoff from the state highway system. Although Caltrans does expect to continue collaborative discussions with the state board and our municipal partners to pursue permit flexibilities to maximize cost-effective funding opportunities through the municipal coordination program that fund regional partnership projects. So the table in the top right corner identifies the compliance strategy to construct stormwater treatment devices to improve water quality from these legacy impairments alongside our municipal partners. The table breaks down the percentage of treatment devices to be constructed within Caltrans property and the percentage of treatment devices to be constructed on the property of our municipal partners in a coordinated approach to meet downstream water quality improvement objectives. You will notice a 20% increased dependence to construct treatment devices within Caltrans constrained property limits, an inefficient approach to meet Caltrans water quality restoration obligation as a result of the nature of Caltrans linear property characteristics and the limited treatment device toolbox that is constrained by the available land use to safely construct these devices and reduce worker exposure. This new permit transitions from a very simple monetary metric of generating compliance units from Caltrans funding contribution towards cost-effective partnership projects. Although TMDL requirements are in the existing permit and the associated numeric targets referred to as waste load allocations are also in established regulation, Caltrans' ability to partner with local agencies to responsibly invest limited transportation dollars that yield the best water quality benefits will be limited in a way that will increase Caltrans compliance costs. Caltrans will not be able to provide much needed funding to our partners for the success of optimized watershed-based projects exacerbating the stormwater community's already limited access to vital funding lines that should otherwise be encouraged as a coordinated watershed response to promote the best and most expeditious environmental outcome. Because Caltrans has limited areas that drain off system, again, and due to the linear nature of our property and the thousands of discharge points associated with the complex drainage network intended to keep the interstate system free of inundation, our funding contribution and associated compliance generating opportunities are limited by Caltrans' unique land use, precluding cost-effective partnership projects. So one of the highlights of our 2012 Caltrans stormwater permit is the ability to fund a robust municipal coordination grant program that again optimizes these transportation investments while maximizing water quality improvements. Over nearly the past decade, Caltrans has funded over $170 million in local partnership projects that have resulted in treatment of over 2,500 acres of Caltrans right-of-way and over 65,000 acres of local right-of-way statewide. Many of these projects would not have been possible without Caltrans funding. And so just to conclude on this slide, really want to drive home the point that with the new permit, there's a much heavier reliance for Caltrans to construct treatment devices on the constrained Caltrans property. And so that's really driving the cost up. And so if we go over the pictures on the right-hand side, you see the required land use, the required right-of-way to construct these treatment devices. They're large-scale devices, and within the constrained right-of-way, it's difficult to site these in a safe manner. So going over the slides here, the 2012 permit, the annual compliance needs are currently under the 2012 permit, $190 million a year. Our annual allocation to address these legacy pollutants, or these TMDLs, is between $90 and $120 million a year. Under the new permit provisions, we expect an increased need of between $50 and $80 million a year. That will bring our total annual funding needs for addressing legacy pollutants to between $245 and $268 million a year, which results in a Caltrans funding shortfall of more than $150 million a year. We do see a lot of collaborative opportunities through permit flexibilities, and we'll continue those interagency discussions with the state board and regional boards to sustain the municipal coordination opportunities. And this opportunity could yield savings of between 35 and 50 million a year. Next slide. On this slide, I'll start by identifying the timeline for various trash control regulations and the associated funding needs required for Caltrans to meet compliance obligations with trash mandates. I will also highlight the paramount $1.1 billion Clean California trash eradication investment that will create a unique opportunity for interagency collaboration on leveraging the impact that Clean California will have on minimizing trash generation through investments in statewide beautification efforts and a robust public education campaign, helping ease the burden on shop needs while creating meaningful results aligned with regulatory trash mandates. Trash has been at the forefront of regulatory landscape over the past decade, and as a result of increasing trash generation and resulting water quality impairments. Caltrans does not generate trash. However, we are responsible for any trash discharges that leave the state highway system as a result of this social and corporate crisis. This new permit continues to bring focus to previously enacted enforcement actions, such as trash TMDLs in the Los Angeles area, the 2017 statewide trash provisions, and the Bay Area cease and desist order as a result of non-compliance with region-specific trash requirements in the 2012 permit. Regulatory trash control mandates require zero trash discharges from approximately 35,000 acres of trash hotspots throughout the state. What does zero trash discharge mean? So by December 2nd, 2030, Caltrans needs to install, operate, and maintain a combination of full capture devices and enhanced litter removal actions through our maintenance forces for Caltrans hotspots. This does not literally mean zero trash is allowed from these hotspots, but requires that compliance be demonstrated through installing treatment or full capture systems that trap particles 5 millimeters in size or greater from reaching the receiving waters, and implementing enhanced litter removal actions that are followed up with visual assessments that result in low trash ratings. So if we go over the slide, this kind of just highlights the sequence of events over time. In 2012, we have our permit that has District 4 specific trash control requirements. 2017, we have the statewide trash provisions with an additional 16,000 acres of trash hotspots throughout the state. And in 2019, we had the District 4 enforcement action as a result of noncompliance in the form of a cease and desist order. And so our annual total trash funding needs is between $273 and $476 million. So we do see an opportunity here through collaborating with the Clean California program. And so Caltrans does appreciate the ongoing state and regional board collaborative discussions and partnering to develop a framework that will demonstrate stormwater regulatory trash compliance progress associated with the 3-year $1.1 billion Clean California initiative, which augments the existing substantial yearly maintenance expenditures and litter removal production currently in place. Clean California is a sweeping initiative to remove litter and engage communities on beautification efforts through job creation and education. This is truly an unprecedented statewide effort which will institute a multi-pronged litter abatement strategy, including a local grant program for statewide beautification projects, with a third of the overall funds going directly to our municipal partners. Caltrans' goal is lasting and transformative change, where all Californians take pride in maintaining our public spaces and beautiful state. Caltrans will engage communities to spark cultural shifts surrounding litter and illegal dumping by investing in culturally competent beautification projects on and adjacent to the state highway system, with a focus on prioritizing benefits to underserved communities that will positively impact California beyond the life of the program. Clean California was authorized in 2021 state budget to make this serious investment to expand litter collection, facilitate community engagement, and deliver public education and a media campaign strategies to ultimately transform unsightly roadsides into spaces of pride for Californians. Just to give some context, Caltrans removed 267,000 cubic yards of trash in 2020. That's enough to fill 18,000 garbage trucks. Clean California will remove an additional 1.2 million cubic yards or 21,000 tons, enough to fill an estimated 80,000 garbage trucks of trash from the state highway system alone. Next slide. So this slide describes the physical constraints of the state highway system that make it difficult to construct stormwater treatment and trash capture devices in the required locations necessary to meet regulatory compliance obligations. Technical constraints also exist in meeting numeric compliance targets that could result in prolonged regulatory mandates beyond the final compliance dates. The regulatory stormwater mandates require Caltrans to meet waste load allocations for 64 legacy impairments known as TMDLs by 2034, and to have zero trash discharges from 35,000 acres of trash hotspots by the year 2030. So there does exist an opportunity to engage with local partners and stakeholders to innovate and advance treatment technology through off-system regional stormwater treatment partnership projects, which is the key for overcoming these physical constraints within Caltrans land use. Again, just to reiterate, regarding physical constraints, Caltrans has historically designed drainage features to ensure roadways are clear of standing water, safe for vehicle traffic, and worker-friendly and safe by avoiding unnecessary worker exposure to dangerous conditions. Caltrans storm drains are designed to efficiently capture stormwater runoff from the pavement and discharge it to the downstream destination outside of the right-of-way. And this is accomplished through a network of tightly spaced inlets and connecting pipes and outfalls, and essentially having to construct stormwater treatment devices on system becomes inefficient because of this historic design features. Next slide. So that concludes the statewide stormwater permit. And now I'm going to transition to the Caltrans cost impact assessment of the 2021 draft construction general permit. This series of slides will cover the baseline 2009 CGP compliance cost, the major changes resulting in increased costs, and the department risk associated with disruption of active construction projects to come into immediate compliance as realized during the 2009 CGP effective date. And an example project highlighting the increased costs and the physical and technical feasibility constraints. The construction general permit regulates the temporary nature of discharge from active construction sites that have a high potential to convey sediment to water bodies as a result of exposed soil areas from major grading. The CGP is not exclusive to Caltrans and therefore impacts any construction site with a disturbed soil area in excess of 1 acre. The adoption hearing and staff report recommendations will likely occur in quarter 1 or 2 of 2022 with an effective date anticipated for July of 2023. The 2009 CGP requires the deployment of various strategies to control the amount of sediment and runoff from construction sites. These strategies include perimeter control, such as silt fence along the project limits, sediment control, such as fiber rolls or straw wattles that are spaced along slopes to slow down water to prevent sediment transport, and erosion control, which is a composition of seed, mulch, and soil binder, which protects bare soils from raindrops that help with plant establishment. These measures are referred to as temporary construction site BMPs. Because other harmful pollutants, such as metals, attached to sediment, the reissuance of the 2009 CGP now includes additional regulatory control mandates in the areas that drain to severely impaired water bodies, referred to as TMDLs. So the major changes, again, just to highlight, are the lack of grandfathering, which will result in immediate disruption to active construction projects by costly and potentially litigious construction change orders for the required heightened treatment. Specific stormwater concentration limits for pollutants in impaired or TMDL watersheds, referred to as numeric discharge limitations. This is over and beyond just the control of sediment construction sites. And there are 2 degrees of limitation referred to as numeric action and numeric effluent limitations, depending on the TMDL. And number 3, no exemptions for emergency projects. Next slide. So the draft construction general permit proposes several significant changes that will result in increased implementation costs and department liability associated with the immediate disruption to active construction projects without a transition period. This transition period would be referred to as grandfathering, and this transition period would allow Caltrans to adapt business process to meet new compliance requirements. Further, some of the new permit provisions may be infeasible to comply with, given the best available technology and physical constraints associated with Caltrans linear projects and limited available property needed to accommodate the large footprint for active treatment systems or these mobile water treatment plants to treat stormwater to the levels required by the permit. The physical and technical constraints will be highlighted during the example project portion of the presentation. The new permit requirement for meeting TMDL pollutant concentration limits are, as currently written in the draft permit and as interpreted by Caltrans, is above and beyond the traditional sediment control requirement and is expected to have the largest cost increase impact. Again, the TMDL refers to total maximum daily load. It's a regulatory enforcement tool used to address legacy water quality impacts to the most impaired water bodies by establishing limits of pollutant loading from responsible discharges. TMDLs are also included in the statewide stormwater permit and set prescriptive timelines for retrofitting those watersheds with stormwater treatment devices needed to restore California's precious water resources and the associated beneficial uses of those water bodies available to all. The Caltrans projected cost impact assessment may change as we continue to engage in interagency discussions with State Board to obtain clarity on the regulatory expectation as the permit evolves from draft to final version. The level of TMDL implementation is based on specific requirements within each watershed, and since Caltrans is required to address these legacy pollutants under the purview of the statewide stormwater permit, actual construction cost impacts under this CGP may be reduced with permit language refinement. So at the statewide level, it is anticipated the cost to implement the requirements of the draft CGP will increase by $51 to $80 million a year over the baseline cost of $136 million with the 2009 CGP for a total annual compliance cost of $216 million. I have a table here that breaks down the categorical cost increase impacts, and I'll just kind of run through these quickly. Minimum BMP implementation includes pre-storm site preparation and enhanced protection associated with material storage. which is projected to increase by 5 to 6 million a year. Russell 2, which stands for Revised Universal Soil Loss Equation. It's a soil erosion prediction model that will be required for projects within the yellow and red TMDL areas as shown on the map on the right-hand side. This is used to determine the level of enhanced water quality protection through deployment of BMPs, like we talked about previously, the fiber rolls, erosion control measures, to protect and prevent the migration of sediment and other pollutants that attach to sediment from reaching downstream water bodies. Active treatment systems may be required to meet prescribed limits of pollutants in stormwater runoff for areas that reside in legacy TMDL impaired areas. And so both ATS or active treatment systems and passive treatment may be required and are expected to carry large cost increases ranging from 18 to 32 million a year. Caltrans is assuming that active treatment systems or these mobile water treatment plants will be required to meet numeric effluent limits in stormwater runoff in the red areas of the map on the right-hand side, which represents the concentration of non-sediment TMDL pollutants, which may require enhanced treatment application at a much higher cost. The projected Caltrans cost increases is conservative in that it is assumed that meeting the very strict discharge limitation will be required for all Caltrans projects that are located in these severely impaired watershed areas. Again, this increased cost could come down if permit language is refined to preclude projects that are already required to meet TMDL requirements under the statewide stormwater permit and do not contribute any additional pollutant sources during the temporary nature of construction activities. And then we have monitoring and reporting, and Caltrans would like to acknowledge that the state board has instituted cost savings provisions in the draft CGP in the monitoring and reporting category, though, through reduced inspection requirements. However, there still is a $14 to $20 million a year increase with new requirements. Next slide. I think we went over this slide in the previous presentation, so I won't spend too much time on it, but this, the Caltrans team took a deep dive to support the projected cost assessment impacts from the increased regulatory framework on the CGP reissuance. So we looked at all existing active projects and scaled up to the number of projects expected and anticipated at permit adoption. We looked at the historic rainfall data, and we also looked at the distribution of projects that reside within TMDL watersheds. And then we applied the current cost of the CGP, came up with the 136 million. And then we applied the new 2021 CGP requirements, which resulted in that $50 to $80 million increase. Next slide, please. Project grandfathering will play a major role in deferring the $80 million increased costs so Caltrans can properly plan, budget, deploy training and guidance documents, and develop sound contracts with all the tools necessary to comply. More importantly, grandfathering will avoid the paramount disruption to active construction projects. History has taught us that having to come into immediate compliance with new regulatory requirements leads to contractor disputes and inflated costs for contract change order work. The 2009 CGP left Caltrans vulnerable to legal action from the contracting community, and project budgets were exceeded to accommodate for items not included in the original bid documents. So Caltrans will continue to collaborate with our state board partners to resolve our concerns through permit negotiations, and we look forward to any opportunity for grandfathering opportunities. Next slide. So I covered most of this already, so I'll try not to be repetitive, but Caltrans has concerns regarding the feasibility of achieving compliance with the new construction general permit requirements for TMDL areas, specifically for projects in the Los Angeles region subject to pollutants such as dissolved metals, which may require active treatment systems or these mobile water treatment plants. We really have a lot of space constraints in the built-out urbanized environment of the Los Angeles area. And the dynamic nature of Caltrans project stage construction really makes it difficult to properly size and site the required treatment devices within the limited footprint of these built-out areas. So really, you know, the technology is also really not available. It hasn't been demonstrated to be effective to meet the discharge limitations. Active treatment systems are typically intended for industrial runoff, not, you know, really sediment-laden runoff from construction sites. And then the pre-construction sediment loss expectations as prescribed by the erosion control model is highly subjective and seems unattainable as well. So we have some concern with that. And again, just the inadequate access to materials needed to deploy those fiber rolls and erosion controls. The supply chain becomes very constrained before rain events. It's really hard to get access to those materials to meet the compliance objectives. Next slide. So this is an example project that we came up with. It's on the higher end of our typical projects. It's a project in the Los Angeles area with a disturbed soil area of 71 acres, a duration of 39 months, and resides in a legacy impaired area, so we refer to as TMDLs. And the TMDL impairments are for metals and nutrients. The activities include roadway improvement, drainage improvements, and landscaping. Very large scale project, and you can see on the map on the top right, we have about 10 discharge points, all of these points of which are required to come into compliance with the discharge limitations. Next slide. If we look at the comparison between what it would cost to comply under the 2009 CGP and compared to the new requirements of the 2021 CGP, we see a nearly 100% increase in cost to comply. And the real cost driver in this case is the additional best management practices or treatment devices needed to comply with CGP provisions. These include erosion control, sediment control like fiber rolls and temporary silt fence at a much higher frequency, much tightly spaced, but it also includes a large footprint to accommodate an active treatment system to meet the runoff limits. That's that active treatment system or that mobile water treatment plant. And then we have additional costs for monitoring and reporting to comply with those TMDL pollutants. Now this cost increase would be under a bidding environment, a low bid environment. And so if this project was in construction, this increase in cost could go way up because now we're at the mercy of a force account or a change order environment. And so that cost could go even higher. Next slide. This slide just kind of highlights some of the constraints of the state highway system. You see in the picture on the left demonstrates the built-out environment, Los Angeles area. From property line to property line, we have roadway and sound walls, not even a full-size shoulder. And so when you get into construction and you're opening things up, there's just really no space to place these active treatment systems that are required to meet the requirements of the TMDL requirements in the CGP. Next slide. So this slide just kind of reiterates some of the unattainable compliance expectations as interpreted by Caltrans and as currently written. We do see opportunities to continue to collaborate to really understand the regulatory expectations, but there's concerns with the best available technology to meet runoff limits. We have severely constrained site conditions that limit adequate placement of treatment controls to meet runoff limits. And if we come into non-compliance, then we're subject to mandatory minimum penalties of $3,000 per violation per day, per discharge point. So these things can really escalate. And so that really will result in impacted our ability to to deliver projects efficiently, right? So it may mean that we cannot have any open areas during the rainy season. We may have to stage things differently. And so this is kind of just the result of the example project. And the next slide this concludes the presentation. We want to thank you for the opportunity to present the Caltrans Stormwater Program cost impact assessments for these two permits as we continue to partner with our state and regional board friends. And I'm available to answer any questions alongside our Chief Environmental Engineer, Hardeep Thakkar.
Thank you so much for this very thorough presentation. Certainly the cost of these permit compliance measures are eye-opening. We have a number of commissioners who wish to speak, and I'm going to start with Commissioner Liu.
Thank you, Chair Norton. Yes, and I also would like to jump on with thanking you for that presentation. And this is obviously a really complicated, important issue, and one that's going to take some real thought and careful work with the state board to figure out. It looked to me, based on your presentation, that stormwater treatment was like the most expensive thing. The trash was separated out from that. But I'm interested in knowing, how much of that stormwater treatment is sediments and how much maybe, nutrients and how much maybe toxic metals, or have we kind of figured that out? I mean, I know that, my work is kind of focused on toxics at times, and I know that there's toxic metals from brake dust and tire wear that we have to be concerned about, and legacy lead from lead and gasoline. But can you break down for us kind of what that, relatively how much is coming from where?
Yeah, so there's a very diverse menu of pollutants that we have. Our stormwater restoration obligations from legacy pollutants, these TMDL watersheds. So the North Coast are primarily sediment and temperature. As we get into the Los Angeles area, it's metals and trash, and trash is a big contribution as well. And the issue is that the various pollutants of concern attach to sediments and then are transported downstream, whether it's in the post-construction environment or in the construction environment, which are, obviously you have more exposed soil. So we have in the post-construction environment, we have treatment control devices, stormwater treatment BMPs. They can be bioswales, infiltration galleries, and these are vegetative features that will scrub out those pollutants, or they're infiltration devices that will remove a certain amount of volume from going downstream and infiltrate into the ground. So, and then in the construction condition, we have the fiber rolls and the erosion control, and then of course reestablishing vegetation that will prevent transport of pollutants downstream. So just a variety of different pollutants. We have 88 TMDLs, 64 of which are currently on the time schedule order for compliance by 2034. 24 of which I would like to acknowledge that the state board and regional boards have concurred that we've met compliance. So there's no further action on those to retrofit the state highway system with treatment devices. So that's a benefit of the collaborative opportunities and the investment that Caltrans has made in providing treatment to address those legacy pollutants.
Yeah, I remember seeing a statistic a long time ago that 50% of the mercury in the San Francisco Bay came from brake dust. Yeah, I know that copper is, or maybe it was copper. Yeah, I think it was copper in the San Francisco Bay coming from brake dust. I know that copper and brake dust is a big issue, and in fact, I think we should be seeing some benefits from a law that was passed back in 2010 that reduced the amount of copper allowed in brake pads. And we can thank former Commissioner Chris Kehoe for passing that law and getting Governor Schwarzenegger to sign it in 2010. That's one of the benchmarks that's coming into play here in 2021 and then 2025, reducing the amount of copper in there. And the other thing I think we're going to benefit from too is as we transition to zero emission vehicles with regenerative braking, we should have a whole lot less brake dust on our roads as a result of that, because zero emission and hybrid vehicles almost never have to change their brakes. It's an amazing thing. So I'm wondering, have you taken those things into consideration in terms of those particular TMDL pollutants and how we might be able to at least depend on that transition to zero emission vehicles and the implementation of SB 346 from Chris Kehoe to manage some of these problems for us?
Yeah, that's a great point. And source control is a very important part of this, right? So when you talk about the brake pad partnership and reducing those emissions for, associated with that, with copper, that's a great advancement, right? And And then we also have the PCB and mercury source from old industrial, old commercial areas that, we're addressing in partnership with our municipal partners in the Bay Area. Even some of the trash control measures that we're putting into place result in reductions of the PCB and mercury pollutants as well. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And so, Caltrans understands we've done characterization studies for the concentration of pollutants that are associated with our right-of-way. And we'll continue to advance studies to monitor that based on your feedback with, the change in zero emission vehicles and having less, exhaust emissions and particulates, being discharged onto the freeway and then transported by stormwater. So great points. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. We now will recognize Commissioner Martinez for her question.
Thank you, Chairwoman Norton. I actually have two questions. The first one, first off, thank you for that thorough presentation. As we're working, I just have a quick question to water districts at the regional level and at local levels. Are we working closely with these water districts as we talk about equity and addressing water control issues? Typically, it's communities of color who are being impacted by water pollution. And so my question is that I just want to ensure that we are having direct communication with some of these water districts because one of the issues, in my time as an elected official, the connection between land use, between, understanding MS4 permits, all the regulations as it pertains to water, we never really made that connection. And more likely, those that are being impacted, and we talked about the Los Angeles region, those are communities that have been the most impacted. And so I just wonder, what is our connection between Caltrans and water departments like the Metropolitan Water District that I served on for 5 years and other local water districts throughout the state?
Thank you for that question, and we appreciate that. The paradigm, in coordination with water control districts is that we're really looking to seek opportunities to harvest water, to recharge groundwater, and to harvest it for reuse, right? So we are prioritizing a lot of those projects in the Los Angeles area. They seem to be the early adopters for this type of approach to capturing and reusing stormwater. So it's a great. And to your second point regarding, the equity lens and providing benefits to underserved communities that have constituents of lower socioeconomic status, we take pride in our municipal coordination program. And in fact, in fiscal year 21, 90% of our municipal grant program went to underserved communities. So we're really looking to advance those benefits for underserved communities, both in the Bay Area and the Los Angeles area, where most of our legacy impacts exist. So those are great questions, and I can see that you're really in tune with the advancements in stormwater treatment and then water harvesting as well. So those are our priorities as well.
Fantastic. And then the second question, how are we addressing the current issues with human waste? I look at it as a public health concern, a crisis, specifically on Caltrans property. I know you talked about Beautify California, but currently there are not many facilities for restroom, and so we have a ton of human waste that can be entering into our water systems. And so how are we addressing that?
Yeah, so bacteria is also a pollutant of concern, indicator bacteria, fecal coliform, et cetera. And so there's various sources, whether it's natural source or as a result of potentially people experiencing homelessness, right? So as we look to advance Clean California and addressing, on a region and statewide basis to get people experiencing homelessness to more safer housing options, we're working in parallel with the initiative that the governor's office has put out to have those safe options as we go out and provide litter removal service at encampments or have hazardous waste contracts to deal with the biohazards associated with those areas. We're partnering with social services really to get out there and to communicate with this environmental justice community to make sure they have the needs to transition to more safer housing, right? And so what I want to highlight is the partnership with social services and then having a holistic approach, a more compassionate approach to provide the needs of this community to get into a safer position. So that's how we're addressing that. So I think we're going to see a lot of positive benefits from Clean California investment in the beautification and helping to address people experiencing homelessness in a more compassionate statewide effort.
Great, thank you.
We are now going to move to Commissioner Falcon. Questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate, Ken, your very, very thorough presentation. I know that this is a continuation from the last hearing. I did my homework. A couple quick questions. I know that Senate Pro Tem Atkins helped secure some additional funding for litter removal for the last budget. Is there a possibility, especially with the looming deadline for compliance, for budget augmentation, a significant one, hopefully, not only to address mechanisms to be implemented to capture additional sediment and TMDLs, but also enforcement. On the enforcement side, it's a huge problem. I'll just say personally, I just get ticked off, to be crass, when I drive the freeways and people just, you know, they don't care, and they just throw trash or they don't secure the things on their vehicles in a way that'll, you know, avoid things flying off their vehicle. So just, you know, is there any thought about the possibility of any budget augmentation on both, you know, what you're all doing at Caltrans, but also on the enforcement side?
Yeah, great question. And really what that leads to is a partnership with CHP. And so with the paramount investment of $1.1 billion in Clean California and the districts implementing Clean California, we have these litter abatement plans which rely heavily on external engagement. So we're engaging with community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations that have an interest in stormwater, CalRecycle, CHP. And so enforcement is a major part of it, but we want to be careful not to widen any existing disparities. You know, we don't want to just go out and ticket people for littering or illegal dumping, you know, and so that's really where Clean California comes in, where we have free dump days, right? So it provides people the option to use free dump days rather than illegal dumping. And then, you know, the education and public outreach component of it, teaching people through partnership with CHP how to properly tarp their loads, being aware of what the potential fines are for littering, you know, $250 up to $1,000. We're having more signs out. We have a big media and public education campaign that's rolling out. So enforcement is a part of it. And we want to make sure and leverage that partnership with CHP in a manner that's respectful of those that may not have the resources to properly dispose of their trash and providing those options. So education is a part of it. And then, of course, the resulting enforcement as applicable. So, you know, having knowledge of our corridors and where, you know, the illegal dumping hotspots are and monitoring those. So that's definitely a part of our implementation strategy on deploying the Clean California Initiative, along with our existing substantial maintenance expenditures yearly to deal with trash. It's been a growing issue for many years, and now we have some tools to help us out in partnerships.
Okay,
Thank you so much. Before we end, I just want to revisit how this became a Caltrans responsibility. I mean, this just seems like a significant mandate, ever increasing, money's coming from the shop. Can you just remind all of us why this is on Caltrans to solve and not shared among other entities?
That's a great question. And, you know, our municipal partners are also subject to trash control mandates. And so because we own the drainage system, we own the right of way, similar to our municipal partners, any trash that's there that then discharges to a water body and causes to impairments resides with us. So it is a social and corporate crisis that we're trying to use that public education outreach, educate the communities and really, you know, address the trash generation through beautification projects so we can start seeing that trash generation lower so that we don't have to expend so many resources on dealing with trash. But it's beyond just Caltrans. Our municipal partners are also subject to it. and we all have the same sustainable goal of improving water quality. And so that's the response to that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. It seems that we are not having any public comment, and this was a very thorough presentation. I truly appreciate your time. We are going to take a short break after this item, and we're going to come back at 11:25. Thank you so much.